Since 2015, I have publicly talked about and named Donald Trump as the scapegoat supreme of America's political elites, as well as those who are faithful followers of their ideology, of their worldview. And since then, through radio broadcasts, through podcasts, through articles that I've written for outlets such as The American Conservative, I have outlined exactly how that dynamic works. In particular, I've talked about how the more they persecute Trump, the more he will gain currency amongst the broader public. You can call this the scapegoat effect, as I have called it. You can call it the cornerstone effect, which I've also outlined in previous episodes of my podcast, Things Hidden. But regardless of what you call it, is no denying that there is a magnetic power to the perception of one being targeted and persecuted as they stand up on behalf of somebody else. My programs on radio, on podcasts, and my written work has all been about trying to explain to the public the paramount importance of taking a biblical anthropological approach to understanding current events. Contrasted from a theological only orientation to biblical texts, an anthropological reading is essential for understanding the effects of the gospel in history. The effects of the gospel not only on our society, on our sensibilities, on our art, on our cultural themes, but the direction of current events. You need both theology, a study of God, and anthropology, the study of mankind and its origins, in order to really mine the depths that is in the gospel text. The gospels are a technology. They allow cultures that are infected with its truths to see the world in a different light. And cultures that are exposed to the gospel but do not truly heed its call of obedience, which is nonviolence, which is non-retribution, forgiveness, mercy, and love as the new foundation of society. Those who are deeply saturated with the gospel in its cultural memory but do not heed its warnings end up falling flat on their faces in chaos. You see, ancient societies used to maintain order. They used to maintain the effects of high stress through the release valve of sacrificial violence. This is what Rene Girard called the scapegoat mechanism, and it's essential for understanding why we are the way we are. Ancient societies wanted to maintain people's sense of sanity when runaway competition becomes unglued, when people are at each other's throats, usually because of a crisis. Scarcity, whether believed or true scarcity, has been at the driving impetus in our history for these states of mimetic insanities, these mimetic, undifferentiated moments of chaos. And ancient societies found a way to try to stave off that chaos by spontaneously finding order through the sacrifice of a common enemy, someone who could be accused of violating the taboo. What taboo has Donald Trump violated that I have pointed out since 2015, singularly in the public? The biggest story. This is the biggest story to take away thematically throughout the years of politics. The taboo that Donald Trump breaks, there's a few, but the core essential one is that he, by his demeanor, by his direct, brash talk, right, reveals the underpinnings of the state in its decorum. He reveals the ugly violence, the brutality, the vulgarity of the state establishment. He reveals its self-centeredness, that it has wrapped up in political correctness language. The politically correct language that politicians on both sides of the aisle use is a form of mythology in real time. In the ancient world, myth was a way of covering up the violence that had been done to scapegoats, to justify the need to use controlled acts of sacrificial violence onto scapegoats in order to relieve the pent-up wrath and stress of a community in a safe direction. If people take each other's stresses out on each other in a state of undifferentiated runaway competition, runaway rivalry, runaway violence is going to be the inevitable result, and dysfunction, disorder, and inevitable societal collapse will take place. So when people build up stress in high times of stress, like plagues, like pandemics, like situations like scarcity of food that you have, whatever it is, famine, any kind of thing that can put people in a pressure cooker environment where stress is abundant, if that is not able to be dealt with in the ancient world through a safety valve mechanism to discharge that negative energy and that belief and guilt onto somebody else's back, that guilt will spread and contaminate a ping pong of accusations all around the camp, spreading bad blood. So the blood has to be pushed onto somebody else. The blood of guilt has to be pushed onto somebody else. So that's why what the Gospels revealed in history, where Jesus comes in to allow humanity to be co-participants in the evolution of our societies, of our civilization, and of Earth itself. We were designed to be the viceroy of the creation of this universe, in this planet. And you can think of this planet as a kind of meta-organism that God created for us to participate in advancing and making more beautiful and making more wonderful. And that's a topic for another time, but just to understand the context that why Jesus came to do what he did by unveiling the truth of our view of sacred violence, of our view of God, that God demands blood sacrifices in order to abate his wrath, is something that Jesus came to unveil and dismantle. René Girard says, we don't invent our gods, we deify our victims. And so to the extent that ancient societies were found to have had relief, extraordinary dopamine release, cathartic relief from stress when they sacrifice somebody, they would then remember the person that they first villainized as a monster boogeyman and turn them into also a salvific savior. That's why all the ancient gods had both mischievous, taboo-breaking aspects of their mythological stories, but also salvific, transcendent, heroic aspects of their stories and attributes. With Jesus, he unveils it all by participating in our process of mimetic escalation to the point of persecution, unanimous violence, projecting our blame all onto him. That's what the community did. They were united. Herod united with Pilate. These people didn't like each other, but the Bible says they were united in their common exposure of Jesus Christ. This story then goes into society and it unveils all of the sausage making of all of our societies, all built on this psychological social phenomenon called scapegoat violence. It is how we create our institutions of power, government. It's how we create our institutions. And Jesus comes in through history and gives us a way out so that we can be creative co-participants in the evolution of our species towards a better direction, one that is more in the image of God. What else do we see in the picture of the marriage supper of the Lamb, in which God and man are united at that final consummation of this process that we're headed towards? So, having said that, when we see what happened yesterday, as of today, I'm recording this on Sunday, we had yesterday, July 13th, Saturday, this shooting attempt on Donald Trump's life. And of course, this is something that is a horrific tragedy. It always stirs people's hearts and souls to see icons and symbols, particularly those who are, represented as avatars for people's sense of meaning and order, to have their life almost ended. Now, all life is sacred. Of course, one of the members of the crowd was killed, a Trump supporter. Looks like a retired fireman and killed trying to protect his daughter's lives from this gunman. And apparently some others are injured. And the shooter, of course, lost his life when he was fired back against. So here's the deal with this whole story. I'll let other people fill out the details. I'm here to give you the big picture view of what this means, and we're not going to cover it all in today's show. I just want to kind of help set the pace for my audience and those who are not as familiar with anthropology and the critical importance understanding the social effects of the gospel have on our society. And that is, the more Donald Trump is persecuted, the more power and social achievement people will imbue into him. Okay, this is the nature of the scapegoat effect once it's been dismantled by Jesus in his passion, unveiling the ugliness of our scapegoat proclivities. He reverses its power in the sense that communities were able to discharge power and find meaning in being able to blame a common enemy. And that's what the effective role that Trump has played for those who are in the establishment political class and the followers. Those are the people who believe, wait a second, I was told if I speak politically correct, if I keep up with the ever increasingly challenging and ever increasingly elaborate holiness codes, the speech codes from political correctness, and now they call it, wokeness and all these other iterations of it, that if I keep up with all of that and I pretend to be a victim or I lean into my victimhood, that is the way in which I will gain power. And of course, Trump was a heretical assault against that because he didn't lean into his victimhood. He leaned into, I'm a tough guy, I can do it. I'm a billionaire, I'm brash, I'll tell it like it is, I'll say it like it is, I'll call people names. And that was a great meltdown moment for so many people who believe, wait a second, if I put on the guise of weakness, as an effect, I can actually get away with doing a lot of selfish things as long as I speak language that's very clean with victimist rhetoric around it. And that is the phenomenon that people try to gain power with in light of the cross event, changing people's perspectives about perceived scapegoats. Scapegoats are no longer going to be used to discharge our tension because they can't. Jesus has deprived that social phenomenon of its power. That's why the left would not be satisfied. If the scapegoat mechanism was successful, in terms of if Jesus had not destroyed that social phenomenon of our past and made it very ruinous, then if that bullet was a millimeter or so to the right or whatever and killed Donald Trump, I guarantee you that the left and the liberals who have been chasing this man's misery as a means of keeping somewhat of a scapegoat, a partial scapegoat unifying effect within their own coalition, that buy into the delusion, that buy into the suspension of disbelief required to kind of make this person their little demigod, it wouldn't have given them the satisfaction. It wouldn't have given them the discharge of catharsis. In fact, it would have turned their stomachs, as the near death has turned the stomachs of folks who hated Trump or were impartial to Trump, or were, they were just, ambivalent towards Trump or against Trump. They're now drawn towards him. How many people? Elon Musk, I endorse Trump. Bill Akerman, I think, Democrat donor, I endorse Trump, Logan Paul, I endorse Trump. All these, moderate centrist types, Democrat types, they feel the magnetic power of a perceived scapegoat martyr moment, and they are just drawn to it like moths to the flame. That wasn't the way society was prior to Christ. Prior to Christ, you wouldn't be mesmerized in terms of saying, oh wow, I am standing up for this underdog because they're persecuting him, they're indicting him, they're impeaching him, they're calling him a monster, they're calling him, horrific fascist dictator names, right? That wouldn't be you didn't create unity based on being perceived to be an underdog prior to the Christ event. And so that's what I'm trying to get at, is that now we have disunity because we can't agree on who the scapegoats are. We can't agree on who to call the boogeyman. And then when we do build a little coalition of people hating on the boogeyman, they don't want to go through all the level of violence that people in previous periods of history have gone through to defeat and destroy their witch, right? To destroy their boogeyman, to destroy their troll. They don't have the appetite for it because Christ has haunted the very sensibilities of culture and the way we have an appetite for violence and how to administer it. We recoil at it, we hide it, we try to redirect it and try to do it in passive aggressive ways. It's still violent, still brutal, the way our prisons, the way our wars, our sanctions, all the different ways that we do, but it's always hidden in victim rhetoric. It's always hidden in this passive aggressive or out of sight, out of mind way. Rhetoric is so important, folks, in terms of symbolically numbing people out to the reality of the vulgarity and the violence of the system that we're all under. And to the extent that Trump's vulgarity of brash talk and demeanor and aesthetic has ruined the decorum imagine that all the other politicians before Trump were like, a bunch of crooked, crony, narcissist sociopaths. But they were all playing this game where they all play Shakespearean actor roles. I am Shakespeare. I am a Shakespearean role. And then Trump gets on stage uninvited. And instead of playing the role of the Shakespearean dialogue that they're all agreeing upon, he's speaking like Stone Cold Steve Austin, the rattlesnake wrestler, right, from Texas. And he's throwing beers and flipping people off and stunning people off the stage left and right. That would ruin the entire expectation of the ritual that is politics. And it would open up those who had played by the rules into a state of frenzy. Wait, our broadcast media monopolies, our magazine media monopolies, we can throw everything at him and it doesn't take him down? The public has lost its ability to be corralled under our official narratives. This is insane. And so they were frenzied in anger and wrath. Who is he to be able to violate all the decorum that allows us to get away with our wicked wars and our steady state of decay, of corruption and pillaging? Trump did not do a dramatic change of the actual policies of the establishment. We still have the IRS, we still have endless wars, we still have all of our bases overseas. He still contributed to a lot of the mistakes and wrong behaviors of our bureaucracy. He doesn't fully understand, maybe now he does, but in the past, he didn't seem to fully understand the extent of the rot of the system. And even if he understands now, he won't have the means as a person to be able to wave a magic wand and get that whole system in a different direction. But what he did understand and what he did change was the rhetoric, the kind of hypnotic spell that politically correct language has in lulling people into the belief that Barack Obama is some kind of like literary figure who is just like this really, like squeaky clean, above the fray, high society, highly sophisticated, peace noble. Like, no, it's such a dark, disgusting mafia thug game, right? But the political correct language is a kind of mythological numbing of the sensation of our moral faculties and being able to look clearly at the reality of the steady state of decay that is our political system and empire and wars and all the wickedness of big pharma and big military and all these other things, big corporatism. So all of these things are being shaken at their core. And politics is not the means by which you actually have change. Real change happens with art. Real change happens in the market. Real change happens with great disruptive innovations, creating energy too cheap to meter, creating new forms of transportation like anti-gravity, creating forms of energy that don't rely on the grid, that people could power their homes with ubiquitous resources for their homes, their cars, their food. Costs could be dramatically changed. The whole dynamic of the relation between the state in the individual and the family would change dramatically with those real innovations in the world of atoms, in the world of material. But what politics does serve is it serves a very powerful battleground in which you can enter into their hokey little decorum and you can use their own symbolic attempts at grandeur and obfuscation of their vulgarity against themselves to expose the public to signs of a better way. And so what I'm trying to say is that Jesus and his impact in history, if we're just looking at it purely anthropologically, not invoking the theological side, Jesus is fully as the things that he predicted in destroying the scapegoat mechanism by participating in it, not fighting back with vengeance, and allowing it to collapse on the weight of his own innocence, has totally created a whole new counter signal that again allows human beings to evolve out of the state of zero-sum, tit-for-tat, stress-dominated, low-resolution way of doing society. And he's given us the path forward to do it, but he's also respected our free agency. And we're very slow to figure out the implications of this. And again, people are much more drawn to want to worship new icons like Trump rather than to imitate the mercy, the nonviolence, and the humility and the vision that Jesus set forth 2,000 years ago. But everything that people find fascinating in figures today is only fascinating because of the extent to which it is a kind of imitation, for good or bad, intentionally or not, with good intentions or bad intentions, whatever it is, of Jesus's aesthetic, of the one against the many, of the misfit, of the underdog. Jesus said, I am the stone that the builders rejected. That's what a misfit is. Misfit doesn't fit in the wall, but it's left to the end of the building project, and it's the different shaped stone that is at the capstone, which becomes the stone that everybody sees and then reveals the truth of the whole situation. That's what Trump is when he is a misfit, doesn't fit into the normal decorum of politics, doesn't fit into the normal way of being left versus right, changes the frame, unveils unintentionally the ugliness of the system in a way he didn't even understand. And once you see the ugliness, it's hard to unsee it. It's hard to forget you saw it. Cat's out of the bag. And so all these prestigious institutions that people thought were little Boy Scout, Mickey Mouse institutions, the public is now waking up to something that many people on the cutting edge of understanding human nature, I guess, those who were actually following the wisdom and the humility of people like Jesus would have seen a lot long ago. Nevertheless, the public has a little bit of a slow delay in being able to get that critical mass understanding. And it's still, we're all in our infancy in understanding the full significance of the implications of the gospel event in history. But this martyr's energy will continue to grow the more they persecute him. I said that when they indict him, he will go farther on the polls. If they put him in prison, can you imagine them trying to put him in prison now after him almost losing his life? There's something symbolic about someone shedding blood. When you see blood shed and he stands up and says, I'm still fight, 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 it's transcendent. You look in the man's eyes, he looks pale, because he just faced his own moment of death. And he says, wait a second, I want my audience to know we still got to fight, fight, fight for the things that I believe in. And the best things about Trump is that he doesn't want those endless wars. He doesn't want he has the only one that ever did any modicum of justice reform, although so much more needs to be done. Okay. So he actually has done some of the smallest, but the only steps towards nonviolent, peaceful directions that this country has had in governance. And all the little grifters all around him, they're taking him and they're doing whatever they do with him for their own particular niche issues and special interests. But the biggest aspects that make Trump transcendent to the extent that he will become a transcendent figure are the fact that he messed with the steady state of globalism, of politically correct garbed violence, of these disgusting wars, of being able to meet Zacchaeuses like Kim Jong-un and Putin, people who are designated to be non-person monsters, which is the psychological space that we're kept in order to be frothing at the mouth with the military industrial complex's $1 trillion a year scam. Oh, we must have it, or else this boogeyman that we're not allowed to talk to in North Korea or Russia or wherever is going to get us. Trump ruins that, right? He has symbolically ruined so much that he's created a mimetic crisis in our culture. And that creates an opportunity for real growth and an opportunity for real danger. Trump is not on an autopilot, okay? He has free agency. He's not, I don't think he's well versed in terms of knowing mimetic anthropology or, that's not his thing. But it doesn't matter. No one's saying you have to get a PhD. We're not Gnostics, okay? We don't say, well, you have to understand these ideas for you to play a role in bringing it forth. No, if we're Christians, we understand incarnational action is where real things are actually shifting. Knowledge comes along with it. But it's not this thing where you get rationalism. Well, I think this idea and I create this little ideology and then therefore I am able to then act out the right answer. No, that's always the pathway to destruction usually. It's right action. And Trump understands, that's why he's always said, this is a witch hunt, this is a witch hunt. All those things those Russia hoax thing was all a witch hunt. He's been attacked ever since he stepped in, or even before he stepped in, with all the phony, dossiers and everything. And the people see it. And that is more viscerally powerful. You're taking away the man's money. You're taking away, locking up half his, key figures of advisors and people in his orbit. You're trying to steal his properties. He must be true, right? Because because they're haunted by the effects of Christ, they know whether it's wrong or right, they know there's just something viscerally, magnetically true about an underdog who is being persecuted and attacked to a level no politician has ever been in their life. They just know there's got to be something approximating some kind of truth, some kind of powerful action, or something this man symbolically represents that is irresistibly a threat to those in power, that they have gone to this extent to persecute him. They've called Bush and Clinton every name in the book, but never to the degree that they've called Trump. Never to the degree have they stripped them of a single home, a single library book, a single cup of tea. But they do everything they can to strip this man of a lot of his, the lawsuits, the money. You know the deal if you've ever paid attention to the news. So the point is that this is a very important time for us to understand how Christianity is affecting our society. It is an effect, not just an institution. The church is the institution, and there is something outside of just the church called the technological or media effect of the gospel that is changing the perception of human beings wherever the gospel is spread, through aesthetic, through art, through storytelling, through news events. All of this is this ongoing experience. And it's an exciting, wonderful time to be alive. We are watching history happen. That's a cliche, but truly, this is Jesus' story. This is his story. And we're watching it unfold as people get glimpses of the truth, that we don't have to use violence. We don't have to use sacrifice to solve our problems. We don't have to use statist and corporatist machinery to have our power mediated. We don't have to use big institutions that lie about food and medicine and lie about our need for war and lie about, creating enmity or inflaming enmity between gender and race and all this stuff. We don't have to live in these stupid mythologies. All these things are built on lies and violence. And the more we start to see it, the more we can off ramp from it. So don't look to Trump as your savior, but understand why he benefits and why our society is so haunted and owned by the structural sense making that Jesus inaugurated in history. I'm David Gornoski. Share this video, share it around, email it, put it out on social media. Let people understand the significance of this moment beyond just the who, what, when, where, how, and who's the person to blame level of these things. That's where most people want to go, right? You see them, and I get drawn into it too. You watch it, it's very electric. They post photos of this Secret Service person, or the shooter was this party member or that party member. He's that. This is why you're always trying to find blame, right? Whenever there's a social crisis, that's the scapegoating mechanism urge that we all have. Oh, isolate the photo of this person, and they make good points. It's not like it's all completely false. There's always half truths in these little irresistible scapegoating impulses. But the point is, the difference is, it's not that there is never a time to have accountability. It's just that be careful of the psychological motivations to want to discharge, aggression on one of the Secret Service members because they, look like they shouldn't be guarding a president, or, of course, the looks like catastrophic failures of that system in protecting Trump. And of course, you also have this other side that are so conspiratorial minded. I think they don't know. It's like I thought about it. I said, these people don't know how to take a win. They're so owned by stress and defeatism. And they're also owned by jealousy towards another person, having like any kind of modicum of being good. It can't possibly be so. They're so smart for they're too smart to not let their little smug self-righteous sense of, oh, I'm above it all. Nothing ever is a real event. And that's a kind of narcissistic entitlement that justifies people's failures to do anything great in their own life. They end up projecting that into every story that they see as a way of saying, well, this was a staged event or some stupid thing like that. Like a guy taking a photo of a bullet. Oh, that was staged. Oh, the guy getting shot. Oh, that's this stupidity. It's a kind of, but that's okay. People have been broken. Some people have fragile egos because they have a lot of stress or whatever, insecurities that haven't been able to be managed in their lives, that they have to go in there and try to find a way to really assuage their ego. Well, he came up and said, fight, fight, fight. I can't experience that moment. Honestly, I have to make it a conspiracy so that I can, justify my desire to hate that person, or to believe that there's never, ever a possibility that people can be human. That's the mistake of people scapegoating politicians, right? You think you're so edgy that you're out. Oh, I'm so smart. I'm against the conspiracies. It's all a trick. But then you end up scapegoating politicians into these kind of like insane divine figures that can trick you at every level. And you've just found another way to worship them in a different way. That's why it's so important to be grounded with mimetic anthropology, biblical anthropology, so that you have wisdom and discernment as you look at these things. I appreciate your time. Again, email me, david@aneighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.